Hey everyone, it's Mike Vukovcan for Pittsburgh Sports Now following a 24-19 Panther win today. And after what happened last week against Penn State, getting waxed by 45 points, you would expect with some of the veterans that Pitt has on this team that it would have responded, and that's exactly what they did. And it's no surprise that the guys who led the way today, that showed up big time, were the veterans on the team. Rashad Weaver, Quintin Wirginis, although he's not a veteran technically, Damar Hamlin's been around the team for a few years. Qadree Ollison, and then Pickett. He's a leader. He's a leader of the offense, and he played well today. But there's no question, coming into the game this season, people were, myself included, were expecting big things out of the Pitt defense. They thought they could be dominating, and I wouldn't call them dominating today, but it's one of their better performances they've had in a while. It sort of reminds you of what happened down the stretch last year as they closed up the season. Georgia Tech last week against South Florida had over 600 yards total offense. Today, Pitt held them to 386, and that was a little bit misleading because they got 99 of that on the last drive of the game. So Pitt's defense came up big time today. That offense, the triple option by Georgia Tech, is something that any team in college football has a hard time trying to stop. And Pitt's defense, Randy Bates, looks like he had the guys ready today. The best player on the field today, in my opinion, was Rashad Weaver. He came into the season with a lot of expectations. People thought, that he could possibly be an all ACC performer, and he had that today. He accounted for 6 tackles, but some of the plays he made in back of the line of scrimmage, forcing throws from Georgia Tech, forcing the runners to maybe cut back when they wanted to take it outside. It was no doubt Rashad Weaver's best performance of the season. I touched upon that on my show on Pittsburgh Sports Live on Thursday, saying that they needed their defensive ends, particularly him and Dwayne Hendricks, to come up big, and they did that today. The other guy that you noticed a lot was Quintin Wirginis, and that's no surprise. It was his best game of the season. He had a big sack in the first half, near the end of the first half, to stop a Georgia Tech drive. He was just disruptive. They had a hard time blocking him. He was shedding his blockers. Georgia Tech, as you know, with their low blocking, it's sort of hard for the linebackers. You got to fight through the blocks. Wirginis did that today. He was big. He was big for Pitt. He was a rock in the middle, and that's exactly what Pat Narduzzi needed. Saleem Brightwell, I thought, played pretty well as well. He made some plays, some physical plays out there, and that was good as well. But the thing that I was most encouraged about on the defense was the play of Damar Hamlin. That kid, what he's had to go through his first 3 years at Pitt, fighting the injuries. People don't even know the surgeries, the injuries this guy's had to endure for Pitt, and he was big today. Damar Hamlin, really in the first half, I counted at least 4 plays, either big hits, plays in back of the line of scrimmage, pass breakups. Damar Hamlin looked like at least in the first half, he looked like a 4-star recruit out there. You got to remember, he hasn't even made 5 career starts yet for Pitt. And so he's still young. Technically, he's a junior, but as far as playing wise, he's young. But performances like this can go a long way for him to live up to that potential. I know he's not putting pressure on himself. He's just trying to stay healthy. He's still trying to learn the offense. But he had a really, really good game today for Pitt, and hats off to Damar Hamlin. One other thing on defense before we move over to the offense was a big conversation piece last week was Paris Ford not playing at all. He did get on the field today. He was actually, for the first time, he was back there returning a punt. He didn't return. I believe he fair caught it or went out of bounds. But he was back there, and then they got him in some situations on the defense. Bates and Narduzzi did a good job today of rotating. We talked prior to the season about the depth Pitt was going to have this season as far as being able to shuffle first and second team units out there to try to give them a little break. And against this Georgia Tech offense, which is fast paced and they're moving a lot, you get tired out there. And good job by Bates and Arduzzi to get guys like out there. And Paris Ford got some playing time today. He didn't really do anything spectacular. He got a chintzy pass interference call, I thought, at the end of the game when they scored. I think that was a no call. The receiver wasn't going to catch the ball, but whatever. They called it. It was up by 2 touchdowns, so it didn't really impact the game much. Offensively, Qadree Ollison, what can you say about him? He's been Pitt's best back this season. Coming in, everyone thought that, myself included, thought Darren Hall was going to be their feature guy. Ollison has been that for Pitt. First game against Albany, he rushed for 73 yards. Last week against Penn State, he was the lone bright spot, aside from maybe Wirginis on defense. But as far as offense goes, he rushed for over 119 yards against Penn State, a touchdown. And then today, he was big in the first half. For the game, he was 17 carries, 91 yards. He probably could have went over 100, but Sean Watson mixed a few other guys in there. Darren Hall got a few more carries than he did last week. But Ollison, he just looks like the player he was when he won the ACC Rookie of the Year a few years ago. Not sure what the difference is, but he looks like a different player. Last year, he looked a little sluggish, maybe a little heavy. Well, I'm not sure whatever the case was, but he just didn't seem comfortable all year. This year, at least through 3 games, he has. He was Pitt's bulldozer on offense when they needed big, tough yards. He did that. He had another big touchdown run. Normally, you associate Ollison with just grinding the ball, getting your 5, 6, 7 yards. Last week against Penn State, he had that big touchdown run, and then today on the first drive of the game, he went 31 yards for Pitt to give him the lead, and then right before the half, he took a short one in to give them the 21-0 lead. But this was a nice one thing before I get to North Carolina. I had to talk about Kenny Pickett. Today he was 16 of 23, 191. The best news of the day was that scary incident right before the end of the first half where somebody was blocked into his knee. You were hoped the left knee wasn't injured. He just missed a couple plays, came out, played the rest of the game. After the game, he told Alan Saunders and the rest of the media that I'm fine, I'm good to go. Looked like that. He was able to play the second half. I don't know that he was moving as well as he normally does, but he looked good. So as far as his pass targets go, he relied on the guys that have been there. Taysir Mack, he had the 60-yard flea flicker, but he also had 4 catches, and he seems to be developing, him and Ra Lopes, those two are developing into Pickett's go-to guys. He hasn't developed much of a chemistry yet with the younger guys. They're on the field, but you can tell that Pickett is really comfortable with those guys. And beginning of the game, he went to French a little bit. One thing I like to see Pitt, not to nitpick a little bit, but they did throw it a couple times deep. But I like to try to go deep a little bit more. A lot of their passes are still rolling Kenny Pickett out and getting things underneath 10, 15 yards. But they did try a couple plays deep. I'd like to see that a little bit more, but I guess the situation in the game today, they didn't really need to do that. But you could tell Taysir Mack, no doubt about it, is Kenny Pickett's comfort guy, at least throwing on the offense. And Pitt was really lucky, the fact that the NCAA granted him eligibility and allowed him to play this season instead of sitting out and playing next year. Up next for Pitt, their record now goes to 2-1. The team that Pitt just can't beat. 0-5 against North Carolina since joining the ACC. This week, I'm sure on the site, Alan and I will break down some of the crazy games that Pitt has had against North Carolina the last few years. They've gone in as favorites, and for whatever the case, whether it's Ryan Switzer, whether it's Qadree Henderson fumbling at the goal line last year, whatever the case, Pitt just hasn't been able to beat North Carolina. It's been the team that's caused them nightmares. They need to do it this week. They're going to go in, despite going on the road. North Carolina, who had their game wiped out this week because of the hurricane, so they're going to have an extra week to prepare for Pitt. But they're winless so far this year, and they still have starters suspended. So they're going to be without some players this week against Pitt. And if there's ever a time that Pitt's going to beat this team and get that first win, has to be this week. They're 2-1 now. You get a win next week, then you go to 3-1, and then you take on a really good Central Florida team, a ranked team on the road, and that's going to be a big test for Pitt. But we'll talk about that next week. This week, North Carolina, Pitt will be the favorites, and there's no reason why I don't see Pitt going down there and winning, but we can get into all that this week. Be sure to check in with Pittsburgh Sports Now all week, Pittsburgh Sports Live, and we'll have coverage for you all this week. But once again, Pitt wins 24-19 over Georgia Tech. Record's 2-1, and we appreciate you joining us, me today, and we'll see you next week after next week's game.